Hello and welcome to this episode of our Leading with Pride series in partnership with Fairer Consulting. I'm Adele Callaghan, Senior Business Director at Hayes, and I'm speaking today with Matt Flanagan-Roberts, Corporate Lawyer at Squire Patton Boggs in Manchester.
Hi Adele.
Hello Matt, lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So, I'd like to start off just by listing some of your various accolades that you have. I'm going to have to read this off. So first of all, I believe you are former recipient of the Legal Professional of the Year Award at the JCI Manchester Young Talent Awards 2021. Yep. I've got that you were previously chair of the Manchester Young Solicitors Group, and I've got that you currently sit as a member of the Manchester Law Society ED&I Committee. Is that right?
Correct, thank you.
Lovely. Well, I'm sure we'll talk in more detail about those. First of all, can you start by maybe telling us a little bit about your background and upbringing and how you got to be where you are today?
Of course, thank you, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you to both you and Hayes for having me here today. So, as I'm sure you can tell, my accent isn't from the northwest. Initially from near Belfast in Northern Ireland, where I grew up. I sort of spent my formative years at during my undergraduate degree at Queen's University in Belfast, where I studied law with French. So I spent a few years in Belfast, went to Toulouse in France for a year, which was an amazing opportunity and improved the French language, and then back to Belfast for my final year of studies. At that time, I was contemplating a move to England to sort of foresee my future legal studies, and took up a legal practice course with the University of Law here in the city centre of Manchester. So I moved here in September of 2013, very much a younger self and raring to go and ready to get stuck in. Sort of towards the end of my legal practice year, I was then approached about a corporate paralegal role with a firm called Turner Parkinson. I spent a year there as a corporate paralegal, then went on to do my training contract with the firm, subsequently qualifying into the corporate department, which I was extremely excited about. During the time in my sort of earlier years as a newly qualified lawyer, I spent a few years with Turner Parkinson before it was bought over by Knights plc. After having spent a year with Knights, I was then approached about a role with Squire Patton Boggs, where I am today. And it's been a fantastic journey since being at Squire Patton Boggs since February 2020. I joined the firm a few weeks before the first lockdown, which had its own various challenges in itself in terms of integration into the team and getting to know clients and colleagues that you're working with on a daily basis. But it was very evident from day one that I made the right choice. So yeah, 4.5 years later, that I've been with the firm. During that time, I spent a year on secondment in our Sydney office in Australia, and we've now been back in Manchester just over 6 months. So
wow.
Hopefully that gives a good bit of a summary.
That's a good snapshot. So can I ask, you're obviously a corporate lawyer, which is known for, big deals, long hours, all that kind of thing. What made you think that corporate was the area for you?
For me, it was massively about the people and the people interaction. I think from day dot, I think just in terms of who I am as a person and getting into the profession and going through the studies from undergraduate through the legal practice course to your training contract. And as many people will know, they're listening to this podcast today, that during your training contract gives you a bit of a flavour for different departments around the firm. Many other teams tried to steer me away from corporate.
Which other teams did you go into?
So I spent a seat in litigation and a seat in real estate. I massively enjoyed my seat in litigation. Mainly, one of the partners there was absolutely fantastic, who I shared an office with. And she taught me a lot with regards to the law and freehand drafting and just about how she carries herself as a lawyer. So she was quite keen about me qualifying into litigation, but I was quite soon back into my role in corporate and knew that it was the sort of department for me. I think sort of that sort of client interaction, the constant sort of communication that you have, the advisory piece that you can advise businesses, whether they're sort of smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, startups, right through to your sort of global corporate organisations and private equity funds that we act for, that I feel it really give me that intellectual challenge on a daily basis, as well as just getting to know people's businesses and sort of helping them grow what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, perfect. And so I'd like to touch on Sydney and how you found your year in Sydney and what you feel are maybe the differences between practicing as a lawyer over here in the UK and then your time in Sydney.
Yeah, definitely. So we made the move over to Australia in October 2022 and we're there for the full year. So From day one of setting foot into our Sydney office, I was straight away involved on 2 kick-off calls on deals that were due to complete before Christmas. So personally, I wouldn't have it any other way. A sort of opportunity to get stuck in, get involved with the partner base over there, get to know their clients, how they operate, but also how they operate within sort of the APAC region as a whole, how they go about negotiation. I find it to be probably a bit more friendly than how we do things from a negotiation perspective in the UK, which is quite an interesting opportunity.
What, less adversarial type?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe it's the Australian air and the culture and the beaches that maybe lends itself to that bit more of a chilled approach in that respect. But during my time, I know something then we'll sort of go on to discuss on the diversity side of things. Whilst I was there and during my time at Squires, I've been heavily involved in our LGBTQI+ internal resource group. So Squires as a firm has 6 pillars of DEI that it focuses on, LGBTQI+ being one of them. And I've been heavily involved with that resource group since stepping into the firm in February 2020. Now, the approach that the firm took whenever we were joining, you had a bit of an induction with our HR team, and when you were sort of working through various forms, there was a section about the pillars of diversity that the firm is involved in, and you had the option to simply tick a box to say, I'd be interested in joining any of the pillars. That information was then passed on to the partner champion for that particular pillar, and within a few days you got a call to say, look, I know you've expressed interest in this, would you be keen to be involved? This is what we're about. Take a bit of time to think about it in case maybe it's something that you're not interested in. But as soon as I had that call, I think in terms of how the firm dealt with it was, I found extremely impressive, but also quite good from a confidentiality perspective, because at the time from joining Squires from sort of my TP nights days, I wasn't fully out as a gay man, particularly within the profession. But that from the day I set foot into Squires in Manchester, I felt like I could be my absolute self, talk about my partner, who's my now husband. Relaying that now back into sort of the Sydney element, I then had the opportunity whenever we were in spending our time in Sydney to be involved in the launch of the firm's LGBTQI+ resource group for the Australian offices. So we obviously have our presence in Sydney, our presence in Perth, and it was phenomenal to see the level of support that was there from my colleagues. Now, looking at the resource group as a whole, and obviously it's subject to everyone wanting to be open about their sexuality, but 95% of the individuals that sat on the committee were allies, which I find extremely overwhelming, and to have that level of support from an allyship perspective was absolutely brilliant. And the sort of interlink between the Perth and Sydney office just truly worked well. So whilst we were there, we had opportunities to run a few events. In February 23, it was World Pride, which is being hosted in Sydney that year. We had the opportunity to host a fantastic panel event, bringing in clients from a really diverse sort of background and mixture of a client base from across the sectors within Squires that we act for, to sort of form that panel and really discuss some key issues that sort of, you know, underpin and underlie the challenges that sit within the community in Sydney and across Australia as a whole. And what we all can do within our sort of professional environments to really help improve the situation. So it was, phenomenal to be a part of that whilst we're in Australia, and I feel like I've hopefully left a bit of a stamp in some form whilst we were there. So that's sort of the experience.
I know, that's fabulous to hear. And would you say then, growing up, was there any point where you felt somebody was a particular mentor to you with regard to being able to come out?
Yeah, I would say there's probably a few people that I have in mind and I'd actually quite like to mention. My eldest sister, for one, whom is a director at Deloitte, spent 22 years initially in Manchester. They since sort of relocated back to Belfast 2 years ago. And very much as an individual, I think whether from a mentor, from a professional angle, or from just purely just being yourself as a person, has always been someone I've massively looked up to. I've looked up to her from a professional sense of, you know, she knew exactly where she wanted to be in her career, knew exactly what she wanted to achieve, extremely hardworking, and I was like, that's what I sort of aspire to be in that sense. Constantly climbing the career ladder. Her and I have had even, you know, touching on sort of more the intersectionality piece around gender equality and some of the challenges that she's faced as a female, sort of, you know, climbing that corporate career ladder within one of the big 4 accountancy firms. But then from sort of the personal sense, in terms of always just being who you are, bring who you are as a person to work, and the importance of that, and the importance of each individual plays such an amazing part to a team because of their individuality. So I'd say my sister. On another front, I would say one of the partners that sort of trained me, as it were, at Turner Parkinson, David Easdown, who is still in the profession himself, very much sort of again challenged me from a professional element to be the best lawyer and junior lawyer as I was coming through the ranks, but also equally from a professional sense would just check in to see if you were okay, which I think sometimes in the profession, I've been lucky to have people alongside me in my career that do look out for you, but not everyone has that. I would say my current boss at Squires, Giles Cheshire, who from the day I set foot in there, he's been an incredible support in terms of, naturally from a work sense, but from a professional angle, to the extent of the initiatives that we want to get involved in with regards to the diversity initiatives that we run at Squires. This secondment to Australia, which he massively supported and probably made happen. And just the sort of ongoing support that he provides to myself and the wider team. And finally, Nadine Stanton, who is the head and founder of Professional Training UK. So I've got to know Nadine sort of over the years from my position as well. Initially was chair of the Manchester Trainee Solicitors Group before moving to be chair of the Young Solicitors Group. I've got to know Nadine sort of through those roles over the years in terms of her putting on training for trainee and young lawyers. And it's very much sort of, skills training in terms of, how to deliver a pitch, how to improve your communication skills, how to improve your sort of project management skills, and identifies key areas. But Nadine's very much from the day and hour I've met her, constantly been a bit of a check-in from is there anything you need? She actually was previously a corporate lawyer herself. She gets the challenges that sort of present themselves from the demands and the hours that can be involved. But someone I feel that we can very much have an open and free-flowing conversation with. So you probably wanted one person there in that answer.
No, three is good.
There's a
three
few
is good. I'm sure everybody will be happy to be name-checked.
Because I feel at different stages of the career, they've been sort of that constant support network, and something I'm extremely, extremely grateful for.
No, that's good to hear. And so, obviously, over the last, 10, 15 years, I'd say things have changed in the legal profession. So do you feel there's a dramatic difference from the times when you didn't feel you could be your authentic self at work to how you are now? And when was that kind of tipping point?
Massively. I would say, the 10 circa years that I've been in the profession, from, doing my LPC in Manchester through to, 6 years, I think 6 years, 6.5 years qualified now. I think that the change has been drastic in terms of you're seeing a lot more firms making genuine efforts to raise awareness in this space. And even an example of what we're doing here today, and it's something I posted about last night when I was saying about coming to the event today. What I love to see is, organisations like Hayes making this actual genuine effort to raise awareness, which just fills my heart from a personal perspective. But I think within the legal angle, there's unfortunately still quite a few firms out there that, when it comes to Pride Month, they just sort of slap the Pride banner below their logo or change the colours, and you sort of look into the granular detail of what they're doing internally, and there's not much going on. Now, there are then on the flip side, so many firms that are doing brilliant things. And I know that, within sort of the scope of firms that are, say, within the Greater Manchester network, you've got your bigger firms like your Squire Patton Boggs, that is a, 42 office global law firm that has the financial and people resource to put time into this. And then, unfortunately, there's smaller firms that just maybe don't have the sort of, we have a separate diversity team that don't have the resource to have that separate diversity team, or sort of the financial resource to really be doing these initiatives. But it's something that I've touched on recently, and we're very much having discussions with the Manchester Law Society DEI committee that I sit on with regards to, well, what can we be doing to help those smaller firms that need the resources out there? So we as a committee are sitting down to look at sort of policies and procedures that you can put in place. So say, for example, I have a good friend who is an employment lawyer, and she transitioned over the past couple of years, and very much the firm that she worked for didn't have sort of a policy in place to deal with those sort of that transition period in terms of leave, financial means, etc. So it's different policies like that we want firms already to have in place, and that we can essentially, as the Law Society, can sort of implement that and have a bit of a portal on our website to say, look, I know you might not have the resources to sit down and put these policies together because they do take time, but here's a bit of a template base that you can use to go at. Now, when you look back in the last 10 years, these conversations probably wouldn't have been happening. To see where we've come today in terms of people really wanting to share ideas, share resources, which I think is so key here. I think that's what a lot of law firms are trying to get at, is they're not trying to sort of keep tight what they know and their sort of intellectual property, as it were. They're wanting to share that with the wider field, which I think whenever you come to DEI initiatives, that's what it's about. It's sharing and caring, in that sense.
Would you say there's been any negativity or issues that you've come across in more recent times, even though we feel like we're living in more enlightened times now? Has there ever been a situation where you felt that's a bit of a, your sexuality maybe is a bit of a blocker?
Definitely, and it's something I touch on time and time again with regards to what we do by way of career. There's a huge expectation there with regards to your business development initiatives and what you're doing above and beyond your sort of billable hours. And at a previous firm, the business development events, particularly within the corporate finance field, a lot of the time just seem to be very golf centric and golf orientated. Now, obviously, having grown up in Northern Ireland, I have an abundance of golf courses nearby, even the village I grew up in. It was just never a sport that I sort of fell into or was overly interested in. And it's something that at a previous firm that I wasn't invited to a networking event. The rest of the meals in the team were. And whenever I challenged and saw the invite in the diary, it was, we didn't think you'd be interested. Why? Because of sexuality. And I thought, it's one of those that there's other people in the team. If it was down to a case that we know you just don't play golf, but that's the sort of situation applied to other people in the team who were very much sort of going into it sort of blind, as it were, from an experience perspective. But I think over the years and since I've been at Squire, it's just something that we are trying to make a conscious effort around in terms of putting on business development events that are very extremely inclusive. Very much, covering everyone that we want to go out and network with, and that I personally think that the more inclusive it is, the more reach that you get, and the more individuals that actually want to come along and attend your events, because I think, Squires are putting on this fantastic business development event that sort of it's open to everyone, and sort of has it in their mind that we're, that's what we're about.
Right, Matt, so we're coming to the end of today's session, but I would like to maybe finish by asking you, what kind of advice would you give to other organisations who are maybe on that early road to trying to implement their own DEI initiatives?
My advice would be support. And I think it's one of those that sometimes whenever firms and organisations think of these DEI initiatives in place and think, wow, how will we even get there to putting something like that on by way of initiative or an event or whatever they're wanting to sort of organise within their firm. But I would just say small steps, but making genuine small steps. Ensure that your sort of employee base across the board are aware of exactly what the firm's trying to achieve. Be very open and honest about your diversity strategy across the board and ensure that's communicated from the outset. Be open to input, opinions, critique from employees across the board, particularly if there's members of the diversity team who maybe don't identify with certain communities that are part of this particular diversity team. Reach out to those who are members of the community to sort of find out what really are the key issues and what they're facing, whether it's day to day in their personal lives or in their professional lives, so that can be sort of fed into the overall strategy. But I would say, it's one of those that you can't do it all from day one, and it's having that sort of strategy in place, and whether it's a sort of 3 to 5 year plan in terms of, right, we're starting from zero, scratch now today, and whether it's a case of, going and looking at template policies that you can have in place that deal with different issues across the sort of diversity platform, and just build from there. And it's nearly like those building blocks that eventually will fall into place. And then, say within the first year, look back at what you've achieved and be like, wow, this time last year, we were not where we are today. And it starts to give, I think, teams and organisations that bit of encouragement for the next year and the year after in terms of what their strategy is. I would say, from my advice to allies who are listening to the podcast today, who are, part of their internal networks or want to, or say, consider themselves to be an active ally is be genuine, and that is the most key thing, and be active about your allyship. If you're part of a committee and there's maybe actions that need to be done following that meeting or your internal sort of committee catch up, take on one or two of the action points that are sort of sitting there that need to be done. Don't let it just fall with members of the community that sit on that particular resource group. But also don't be afraid to ask questions. I recently had one of the partners in our banking team come and ask me a particular question that he had about the LGBT community, more from a personal sense, and just said, look, I as an individual would like to be more educated within this particular sort of piece of the LGBTQ acronym, which I thought was fantastic, and it's creating that sort of open space that people feel that they can come into you, ask these questions and do a bit of self-education. My advice to members of the community would be bold, be brave, and do not feel scared to challenge the norm.
That's fantastic. So Matt, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really enlightening, and I think that your insights will make a big difference to the legal communities. And thank you for watching or listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more episodes, or via Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like any further pointers on what's been discussed today, please visit our Hayes UK and I websites or faireconsulting.com.